It was the fall of 2007, and my friends James, Sean, and I had just graduated high school. We were restless, eager for an adventure that would mark the transition from childhood to adulthood. One night, we sat around a fire in James' backyard, drinking beers and reminiscing about our school days. The conversation turned toward the things that scared us: ghost stories, haunted houses, and the occasional horror movie. It didn't take long before the topic of Ouija boards came up. James, who was always the instigator of our more reckless ideas, mentioned that he had one stashed in his closet at home. I'll never forget the way his eyes lit up as he described the mysterious board he had bought from a thrift store in the next town over. He said it was an authentic, vintage Ouija board. That alone was enough to spark our curiosity. "Come on, it'll be fun," James urged. "I've always wanted to try one, and it's been a while since we've done something crazy." Sean, who was usually the more cautious of the group, hesitated. "Are you sure? I'd heard some bad things about these things. What if it really works? What if we open something we can't close?" We all laughed off his concerns, but deep down, I shared his unease. I had heard the stories: people losing control of the board, things moving on their own, strange messages coming through from beyond. But that night, the thrill of the unknown, the excitement of possibly experiencing something supernatural, overpowered my better judgment. Before I knew it, we found ourselves in James' car, driving out of town to an abandoned church we had heard about through a friend. The church had been shut down for decades, and rumor had it that it was haunted. People said strange things had happened there: disappearances, odd noises, and even sightings of shadowy figures in the windows. It seemed like the perfect place to put the Ouija board to the test. We arrived just after dusk. The church was set on a small hill, surrounded by trees that had long since lost their leaves. The wind whispered through the branches, making the place feel even more desolate. The church itself looked like something out of a horror movie. A Gothic structure with broken windows, a sagging roof, and a door that had clearly been forced open at some point. "This place gives me the creeps," Sean muttered as we got out of the car. "You're just being paranoid," James said, slapping him on the back. "Come on, let's have some fun." We grabbed the Ouija board and candles from the back seat, making our way toward the entrance. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and rot. As we stepped inside, the floor creaked under our weight, and the faint smell of decay hit us. The interior was even worse than the outside. Dust, cobwebs, and broken pews scattered across the floor. The stained glass windows were shattered, allowing the moonlight to filter in and cast eerie shadows across the room. We set up the Ouija board on one of the front pews, placing the candles around it. We dimmed the lights on our phones, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. "I've never done this before," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How does it work again?" James grinned, clearly excited. "It's simple. We all put our fingers on the planchette, and we ask the board questions. If something's here, it'll move the planchette to answer us." "I don't know about this," Sean said, his voice wavering slightly. "This place feels wrong." "Come on," James insisted. "We're here, let's do it." Reluctantly, we all placed our fingers on the planchette. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound being the creaking of the old church. James broke the stillness. "Is anyone here with us?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence of the abandoned church. For a long moment, nothing happened. The planchette stayed still, unmoving. We laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease. "I told you it was a waste of time," Sean muttered, but there was still an edge to his voice. Then, without warning, the planchette began to move. At first it was subtle, just a slight shift. We all looked at one another, wide-eyed. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell?" I whispered. James, eyes wide, leaned in closer. "It's moving." The planchette slid slowly across the board, stopping at the letter H. "Who's there?" James asked, trying to sound confident but failing to hide the tremor in his voice. The planchette moved again, this time to the letter E. "Wait, what?" Sean said, suddenly more alert. "This isn't funny, guys. Are we really doing this?" But the planchette continued its eerie dance across the board, spelling out a name. Harriet. "Harriet?" I said, trying to make sense of it. "Who's Harriet?" Before anyone could respond, there was a loud crack, like a piece of wood snapping. It came from the altar at the farthest corner of the church. We all froze, our eyes darting to the darkened space. "What was that?" Sean asked, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know," James said, trying to keep his cool. "But it's just the house settling, right?" But then, we heard another noise, much closer this time, like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Suddenly, the planchette shot across the board, coming to a stop at the no section. "What the hell?" I whispered. Before I could ask anything else, there was a loud thud, followed by a soft but distinct sound, a rock landing on the Ouija board. We all jumped back, startled and terrified. The candle flames flickered, casting wild shadows across the walls. I looked down at the board. The rock had come from nowhere. None of us had moved, and yet there it was, sitting on the planchette. It was smooth, the size of a golf ball, with an unusual pattern etched into it. "That's it. We're done," Sean said, his voice panicked. "I'm out of here." James stood up quickly, and the three of us bolted from the church, fear driving our every step. We didn't stop until we were outside, gasping for breath, the night air cold against our skin. We didn't say anything to each other as we ran to the car. All I could think about was what had happened inside that church, the sounds, the movement of the planchette, and the rock. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to explain it. We drove back in silence, the tension thick in the car. James kept glancing nervously at the rearview mirror, as if expecting something to be following us. The next day, we decided to go back to the church. Partly out of curiosity, and partly because we were too scared to leave the unanswered questions hanging over us. When we arrived, the place was just as creepy as before. We went inside, trying to find the Ouija board and the candles, but they were gone. The only thing left was the rock. The candles were still where we had left them, burnt down to stubs, but the board was missing, along with the planchette. We looked everywhere, but there was no sign of it. It was like it had disappeared. We left the church that day feeling more confused and unsettled than ever. Was it a prank? Had someone else been there, moving things around to mess with us? Or had we really contacted something from beyond? None of us talked much after that, but the experience haunted us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us from the shadows of that old church, something we had disturbed and maybe never truly escaped. And to this day, I still wonder if it was all just a prank, or if we had opened a door that should have remained shut. It was a quiet, peaceful Saturday afternoon when Marissa and I decided to take a drive out to the countryside. We had been looking for a place to settle down, away from the noise and chaos of city life. Marissa was an equestrian, so we had dreamt of finding a property with enough land for horses, a barn, and a peaceful view. Little did we know that what began as a simple house hunting trip would soon turn into a nightmare we'd never forget. We set out early, driving through winding roads that took us further from the city and into the dense woods and open fields. The air was crisp, the sun warm but not oppressive, and the drive was exactly what we needed. A moment of calm before we made any big decisions about our future. "Look at that one," Marissa said, pointing out of the window at a small, charming property nestled among some trees. I looked at it and smiled. It's perfect, big enough for horses, and the view is incredible. We turned off the main road and onto a smaller, unpaved one that led up to the house. As we approached, I noticed something strange. A small, run-down church at the end of the road. It looked ancient, with crumbling walls and a half-collapsed roof. The kind of place you would expect to see in a horror movie, tucked away in some forgotten corner of the world. Its presence seemed out of place, almost like an anomaly. "Maybe there's a service going on," Marissa suggested. "We should check it out." I frowned. "It looks abandoned." She shrugged. "Doesn't hurt to take a look, right?" We pulled the car up beside the church and parked. The building was small, but it had an eerie charm to it. The old wooden door creaked as we pushed it open, and a wave of musty air hit us. Inside, the church was dimly lit, the only light coming through the cracked stained glass windows. There were rows of old pews, some of which were covered in dust. Others slightly askew, as if they hadn't been used in years. At first, we thought we were alone. But as we stepped further into the church, we noticed a group of people sitting in the pews. They were all dressed in plain clothes, simple, earth-toned garments, and none of them seemed to acknowledge our presence. They sat motionless, staring at the floor, their faces hidden in shadow. It was strange. There was no singing, no murmuring, just a deathly silence. "Do you think they're in some kind of prayer?" Marissa whispered. "I don't know," I muttered, feeling uncomfortable. "This place feels off." We took a few more steps forward, and as if on cue, the congregation slowly turned their heads to look at us. It wasn't just one or two people. Every single person in the room slowly rotated their heads in perfect unison. Their eyes were vacant, emotionless. There was no smile, no warmth, only cold, unsettling stares. My heart skipped a beat. It felt as though they were waiting for us, as though we had interrupted something. "Maybe we should go," Marissa said, her voice trembling. Just as I was about to agree, a man stood up from one of the front pews. He was tall and thin, his face obscured by a white mask. It wasn't a traditional priest's mask or anything that seemed ceremonial. It looked like something someone would wear to hide their identity, featureless, blank, and utterly unsettling. He took a slow step toward us and raised a hand. "Leave," he said in a low, commanding voice. "Now." His voice was almost mechanical, emotionless. My blood ran cold. I wanted to ask what was going on, but I couldn't speak. Marissa's grip on my arm tightened as she looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Without another word, we turned and hurried toward the door, our footsteps echoing in the silence of the church. As we stepped outside, I looked over my shoulder. The man in the mask stood in the doorway, watching us. The rest of the congregation had not moved. They just sat there, motionless, as though they hadn't even noticed we were gone. We didn't say anything as we rushed back to the car. The peaceful countryside that had seemed so inviting moments before now felt suffocating, dangerous. Marissa started the engine, and we drove away, not daring to look back. But as we neared the end of the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. A van had pulled out from behind the church, its headlights illuminating the darkening road. I frowned, feeling uneasy. The van wasn't speeding up to pass us. It was following us, slowly, deliberately. I turned to Marissa. "Do you see that?" She nodded, her voice shaky. "It's been following us for a while." The van stayed behind us, maintaining the same distance. Every time we turned, it followed. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of the situation. Who were these people? What had we stumbled into? The man in the mask, the silent congregation, they were all so strange, so unnatural. It felt like something far darker was at play here. "I think they're following us," I said, my voice tight. "We need to get to the sheriff's office." Marissa didn't argue. She slammed her foot on the accelerator, trying to outrun the van. The road seemed endless as we sped down it, our headlights cutting through the darkness. The van stayed behind us, its headlights like a constant reminder that something was wrong, that we weren't safe. When we finally reached the sheriff's office, we pulled into the parking lot, our tires screeching. We jumped out of the car and rushed inside. The deputy at the front desk looked up in surprise as we burst through the door, panting and out of breath. "Is everything okay?" he asked. We need help. There's a van following us," I said, my voice shaking. We were just at a church, and, before I could finish, I turned around. The van had pulled up outside the sheriff's office and was now parked across the street, its headlights still on, its engine running, but there was no one inside. The deputy followed my gaze and frowned. "You're sure about this?" "Of course we're sure," Marissa exclaimed. "They're watching us. They've been following us since we left that place." The deputy didn't say anything at first, just stared at the van for a moment. Then he stood up and walked toward the door. "We'll handle it from here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You two stay here." We waited in the sheriff's office, the tension thick in the air. After what seemed like an eternity, the deputy returned. "There's nothing there," he said, his brow furrowed. "The van's gone. It was just sitting there for a while, but now it's gone." "Are you sure you saw it?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I saw it. It was right there. I know what I saw." The deputy sighed. "You might have been imagining things. It's a quiet area out here, and sometimes people get a little paranoid. Maybe you should get some rest." We didn't feel reassured. If anything, we felt more unsettled than ever. The van had been real, hadn't it? The sheriff's office was right there, and the van was gone. But there was no mistaking what had happened, what we had witnessed. That church, those people, something about them wasn't right. It wasn't just the mask or the vacant stairs. It was the way they acted, the way they spoke. There was something sinister about that place, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching us long before we arrived. We left the sheriff's office in a daze, unsure of what had just happened. As we got back in the car, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Was it over, or had we just walked into something much darker than we realized? Marissa and I never spoke about the church again. We found a beautiful property not far from the town. But every time I drive through the woods or past an old building, I feel that familiar unease creeping up my spine. I don't know who those people were or what their intentions were. I don't know what kind of cult we accidentally stumbled into. But one thing's for sure, there's more to that church, more to those people, than meets the eye. And we were lucky to leave when we did. I was just a young Cub Scout, no more than 8 years old when it happened. It was a Sunday morning as usual, when my mom bundled my brother and me up for church. The routine was always the same, waking up early, putting on my little uniform, and walking with her to the old stone church down the road. The bells rang, and we entered, the air thick with incense and the solemn hum of the congregation. But what I didn't expect on that particular Sunday was the man who would haunt my memories for years to come. The church we attended was an old building, one of those classic Gothic structures with towering spires and dark wooden pews. The smell of old books and polished wood always filled the air, and the cold stone walls seemed to echo with whispers of the past. It was a place where the comfort of routine and faith seemed to offer a shield from the world outside. But that Sunday, that shield would be broken. As we entered the church, I noticed a figure standing at the back near the entrance. He was older, probably in his late 60s or early 70s, with thinning gray hair and an ill-fitting suit. He had an odd presence, not one that belonged to a priest or any of the other regular churchgoers, but more like an outsider, someone who had no place there but had somehow settled in. He didn't look at me at first. But as my mom guided me and my brother down the aisle to our usual seat, I felt his eyes on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was more of a deliberate, lingering stare, as if he were studying me. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard. The feeling was unsettling. It wasn't the kind of stare that made you feel safe or welcome. It was the kind that made your skin crawl, the kind that made you want to look away and hurry past. The Mass proceeded as normal, the priest's voice echoing in the high vaulted ceiling, the choir singing hymns that should have been peaceful, but instead felt distant. Every time I glanced over to the back of the church, I saw the man standing there, still staring at me with those cold, sharp eyes. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that he was just another old man who didn't know how to behave in church, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After the service, as people began to leave, I caught the man's gaze once more. He smiled at me. His smile was wide and strange, more like a grimace than anything else. It wasn't the kind of smile you would expect from a friendly old man. It was too sharp, too pointed, like he was seeing something no one else could. I looked away quickly and grabbed my mom's hand, ready to leave. But that wasn't the end of it. The following week, I had another Cub Scout meeting at the church. I didn't particularly enjoy the meetings, but I went because I knew my mom expected me to. It was supposed to be a simple night of playing games and learning about scouting, but it turned into something far more disturbing. We were having a scavenger hunt, and I was running around the church's hallways, looking for items on the list, when I found myself in a narrow hallway that I had never seen before. The walls were lined with old portraits of long-forgotten church leaders, their eyes following me as I walked past. It was eerily silent, the only sound being the faint echo of my shoes against the stone floor. That's when I saw him again, the same man from the previous Sunday. He was standing at the end of the hallway, staring at me. This time, his smile was gone, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite place. He wasn't just looking at me now, he was looking through me. "Hey kid," he said in a low, raspy voice that sent a shiver down my spine. "Why don't you come with me? I have something special to show you." The words seemed strange, out of place, especially coming from someone I had never spoken to before. But there was something more unsettling about the way he said it, like he had a hidden agenda, something I wasn't meant to see. I froze, not knowing what to do. He took a step closer, his thin fingers twitching, as if he was about to reach for me. There was a smell coming from him, something rancid, like old books, mixed with mildew. It made my stomach turn. "No thanks," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I took a step back, but he stepped forward again, blocking my way. "Come on, don't be shy," he urged, his voice growing colder. "I just want to show you something you'll like." My heart was pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't go with him. There was something terribly wrong with the situation, something that screamed danger. Without thinking, I turned and bolted down the hallway, my feet pounding against the cold stone floor. I didn't look back until I reached the main area where the other scouts were gathered. My breath came in short, frantic gasps, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. I couldn't. I was too scared to put it into words. And besides, who would believe me? Everyone else seemed to be busy with their activities, laughing and chatting, oblivious to what had just occurred. The next few days were a blur of fear and unease. Every time I went to church or passed by the hallway, I felt the man's eyes on me. I didn't want to go back, but I had to. My mom expected me to continue with my Cub Scout meetings, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her why I didn't want to go. But I was terrified of seeing him again. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. I told my mom what had happened, what I had seen, and what the man had said to me. She listened carefully, her face growing pale with concern as I spoke. After a long silence, she called the church and reported the incident. It didn't take long for things to escalate. The church investigated. And it turned out that this man wasn't just some stranger. He was a volunteer who had worked at the church for years. He had been known to act strangely around the children, making unsettling comments and even offering to show them special things, just like he had said to me. When the church officials looked into his past, they found that there were several allegations of inappropriate behavior toward children in the past, though they had never been formally reported. The church severed ties with the man immediately, and he was banned from the property. The news of his departure spread quickly through the congregation, but I never felt safe again. I could never shake the image of his creepy grin and his cold, distant eyes. And though he was gone from the church, the feeling of being watched never left. Years later, I would learn that he had disappeared entirely, leaving no trace behind. Some say he moved to another town, perhaps to find another unsuspecting child to target. Others believe he simply faded away into obscurity, never to be heard from again. But for me, the memory of that man and the horror of his words would stay with me forever. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run away that day. Maybe nothing. Maybe something far worse. But the fact that he was allowed to work at that church for so long, knowing what he was capable of, still haunts me. And every time I walk past that old church, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another opportunity.
After graduation, my friends Thomas, Michael, and I decided to take a weekend trip to Ridgeville, a quiet little town tucked away in the North Carolina wilderness. Ridgeville was the kind of place where the locals didn't lock their doors and everyone knew everyone else's business. It wasn't much to look at, just a few scattered houses, some small businesses, and long stretches of untamed forest surrounding the town. The trip was meant to be a kind of last hurrah before we all moved on with our lives. We didn't have any particular destination in mind, just a vague plan to explore the nearby woods and enjoy the freedom of a post-graduation adventure. But things didn't go according to plan. We had driven out to Ridgeville to escape the chaos of graduation day, a day filled with endless goodbyes and the weight of uncertainty about the future. The drive was peaceful, the windows down, the wind in our faces. As we entered the woods on the outskirts of town, the air grew cooler, the trees more dense and the roads less paved. We didn't realize how deep we had ventured into the forest until we stopped for a break and noticed that the sky had begun to darken. We were officially lost. It didn't take long for us to realize we had no idea where we were. The sun had started to set, and the once familiar roads were nowhere to be found. We figured we might have wandered off the trail, but nothing felt right. The air had shifted, taking on a heavy, almost oppressive quality, as if the woods themselves were alive with some unknown force. "We should probably head back," Michael suggested, his voice tinged with unease. Thomas, ever the optimist, shook his head. "Come on, it's just a little bit farther. Let's see what's out there. Maybe we'll find a way out." We continued walking, trying to retrace our steps, but the woods just seemed to stretch on forever, the trees closing in around us. As we moved forward, the sounds of nature began to quiet, the normal hum of the forest replaced by an eerie silence. We couldn't even hear birds anymore. That's when we spotted it. Off in the distance, through the trees, a dark silhouette stood against the fading light of the sky. It was a building, an old crumbling church, half hidden by the forest. Its stone walls were cracked and overrun with ivy, the roof sagging in places, and the windows were nothing more than shattered remnants of glass. Thomas, ever the curious one, was the first to move toward it. "What do you think it is?" he asked, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I don't know, but it doesn't look like anyone's been here for years," Michael replied, his tone cautious. We cautiously approached the church, the air growing colder the closer we got. As we pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the creaking sound echoed through the space, sending a chill down my spine. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dust and decay. The pews were scattered, broken, and neglected, while the altar at the front of the church looked as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. There was a strange smell in the air, a mixture of mildew and something older, something more ancient. The place felt like it had been untouched for decades. Yet, despite its state of ruin, there was a strange, almost inviting sense of quiet to it, like a forgotten sanctuary in the heart of the forest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "We should go in," Thomas urged, already moving toward the pews, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could protest, Michael stepped inside. We all followed, our footsteps reverberating in the empty space. As we ventured deeper into the church, we noticed the odd arrangement of chairs, some pushed aside, while others stood perfectly still, like they had been set up for something, or someone, that hadn't yet arrived. I looked up toward the altar, and that's when I saw her. A woman, old and frail, sat at the piano near the front of the church. Her hair was long and gray, and she wore a faded dress that seemed out of place in a church. Her face was pale, too pale, almost lifeless. She didn't greet us or even acknowledge our presence. Instead, she just stared straight ahead, her hands resting motionless on the piano keys. None of us spoke. We just stood there, watching her, unsure of what to do next. "What the hell is this place?" Michael muttered under his breath. Before any of us could say anything else, the silence was broken by a low, raspy voice from the back of the room. "Can I help you?" We turned to find a man, standing at the back of the church. He was tall, with a long, gaunt face, and his eyes were dark, sunken into his skull as though he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were old, worn and faded, much like the church itself. "We're lost," Thomas said quickly, trying to maintain his usual calm demeanor. "We were hoping you could help us find our way out of the woods." The man didn't respond immediately. He just looked at us, his gaze unsettling in its intensity. Finally, He nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curling on his lips. "The woods are not safe for the lost," he said cryptically. "You can stay here, but you'll find no peace. The forest has its own ways of keeping people." I didn't know what to make of his words, but I could feel a growing sense of unease in my gut. There was something about the way he spoke, something that made me want to run. Thanks, but we really need to get out of here," Michael said, his voice trembling slightly. The man's expression darkened. "The path you seek is not so easily found. Follow the road, and the trees will guide you, or lead you further astray." We didn't wait for him to say anything more. Without a word, we turned and hurried back toward the door. But when we reached the threshold, I looked back once more. What I saw still haunts me to this day. The woman at the piano had stopped playing, and the entire congregation had gathered around her, all of them staring at us with empty, unblinking eyes. I counted at least a dozen men, their faces hollow, their expressions devoid of warmth. They stood motionless, as if waiting for something, waiting for us to make a wrong move. My heart raced. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck as I grabbed Thomas and Michael by the arms, pulling them out of the church. We stumbled out into the fading light, trying to ignore the oppressive feeling that weighed on us. As we left the church behind, I felt eyes following us. Turning my head, I saw the figures of the men standing by the door, watching us with the same lifeless gaze. We walked quickly, not daring to look back. But the feeling of being watched never left. We finally made our way down a long dirt road, unsure of where it would lead us. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the shadows stretched longer with each passing minute. It was getting darker, and I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind us. I quickened my pace, but so did the footsteps. Someone, or something, was following us. "Do you hear that?" Michael whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, but before I could say anything, we saw something in the distance. It was a gas station, old and run down, but it was the first sign of civilization we'd seen in hours. We hurried toward it, hoping for some help. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay, and everything seemed frozen in time. Behind the counter sat an old man, hunched over, reading a tattered book. His eyes flicked up when we entered, and he smiled, a crooked, unsettling grin. "You boys lost?" he asked, his voice rough. "We're just trying to get out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you help us find the highway?" The man's smile widened. "Follow the road. Take a left at the pole and keep walking. You'll find what you're looking for." We didn't question him. We thanked him and quickly left. But as we walked down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The man stood at the door, his grin never leaving his face, his eyes following our every move. We eventually reached a telephone pole, just as the man had said. Turning left, we walked down the trail, but the darkness grew thicker around us. The world seemed to close in, and every step felt like it was taking us further away from safety. We finally reached the highway, but by then it was completely dark. We tried to flag down passing cars, but no one stopped. The fear that had been simmering in my chest began to bubble up, and I could feel the weight of the strange encounter pressing down on me. Just as we were about to give up, a police car appeared, lights flashing in the distance. The officer pulled up beside us, rolling down his window. "You boys lost?" he asked, his voice low. "We've been walking for hours," I said. "We just need to get back to town." The officer whistled. "You're lucky I found you. There are some crazy folks in these woods, doing God knows what. You'd be wise to stay away from the forests around here." His warning hung in the air, but by then, we were too exhausted to care. He drove us back to Ridgeville, but even after we got there, the unease never left. To this day, I can't explain what happened in those woods. What we saw, what we felt, it wasn't natural. Something was out there, something dark, something ancient, and I fear that, no matter how far we run, it'll always be waiting for us.
The road to Blackthorn Hollow twisted through a dense New England forest, where gnarled trees cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Emily Harper gripped the wheel of her aging Toyota Corolla, the hum of the engine barely audible over the wind rattling the windows. At 28, she was a freelance journalist with a reputation for chasing stories others dismissed, urban legends, ghost tales, the kind of thing that thrived in obscure corners of the internet. Her latest obsession had brought her here, to a town so small it was a mere speck on the map, chasing whispers of St. Agnes Church. The tip came from X, where users posted cryptic warnings about the church. Voices chanting Latin at midnight, shadows moving in the stained glass windows, a cold that seeped into your bones. One post, from a now-deleted account called Hollow Wanderer, had hooked her. A blurry photo of the church's altar, streaked with what looked like blood, captioned, "It sees you." Emily had saved the image, her curiosity outweighing her skepticism. She'd seen her share of hoaxes, but something about Blackthorn Hollow felt different. Her GPS flickered, the signal dying as the forest thickened. "Of course," she muttered, glancing at the paper map on the passenger seat. The church was supposedly just off the main road, marked by a faded sign. Her phone buzzed with a text from her editor, Sam. "You sure about this? Sounds like a dead end." She smirked and typed back, "If it's nothing, you get a quaint travel piece. If it's something, you owe me." No signal to send it. She tossed the phone aside and focused on the road. The sign for St. Agnes appeared, half swallowed by vines, its letters barely legible. She turned onto a dirt path, the car jostling over ruts. The church emerged from the trees, a Gothic monolith of weathered stone, its spire stabbing the twilight sky. Ivy clung to its walls, and the stained glass windows were clouded with grime. The air grew heavy as she parked, a chill prickling her skin despite the warm September evening. Emily grabbed her notebook, camera, and flashlight. She'd explored abandoned places before, factories, asylums, but St. Agnes felt alive, its silence too deliberate. The double doors, warped and splintered, creaked open easily, revealing a cavernous interior. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of dusty pews, a cracked pulpit, and an altar draped in tattered cloth. The stained glass saints stared down, their eyes hollow. Her boots echoed on the stone floor, each step amplifying the quiet. Near the altar, a low hum stopped her, a faint choral sound, like distant voices. She froze, straining to hear. It faded, leaving only her heartbeat. "Wind," she told herself, jotting a note. "Auditory hallucination, check for drafts." But her skin crawled as she approached the altar, where a brass cross lay tilted, as if knocked over. Behind it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness, the crypt. Her instincts screamed to leave, but her curiosity won. She'd check it later, with more light and a guide. For now, she snapped photos, the camera's flash briefly banishing the gloom. As she turned to go, a shadow darted across a pew. She spun, flashlight sweeping the area, nothing but dust motes. Her breath caught. "Get it together, Emily," she whispered, heading for the door. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, reluctant to let her go. She drove to the Hollow Inn, her mind replaying the hum, the shadow, the weight of the church's gaze. Blackthorn Hollow was a cluster of sagging buildings along a single street, a diner, a general store, a gas station frozen in the 80s. The Hollow Inn, a Victorian relic with pewing paint, was run by Clara Everett, a wiry woman in her 60s with eyes that saw too much. "You're the reporter," Clara said, sliding a key across the counter. "Heard you're poking around St. Agnes." Emily nodded, keeping her tone light. "Just chasing a story. Any local legends I should know?" Clara's smile was thin. "That church is just a ruin. Nothing worth writing about. Stay out at night, though." She turned away, ending the conversation. Emily's room overlooked the church's spire, a dark silhouette against the horizon. She unpacked her laptop and transcribed her notes, the hum and shadow lingering in her mind. On X, she found more posts, "Don't go in the crypt, she's there." The account, Lost and Hollow, was deactivated. She screenshot it, her pulse quickening. At the diner, locals gave her sidelong glances. She overheard talk of a bad harvest, a missing cat, and the church acting up. When she asked an older man about St. Agnes, he muttered, "Let the past lie," and left. Lily, the young waitress, was friendlier but cautious. "You're the journalist? Be careful up there. It's not just stories." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "My grandma said the church listens." Back at the inn, Emily couldn't sleep. The spires seemed to watch her. She wrote, "Town scared, hiding something, historical records next." She drifted off, dreaming of a choir singing in a language she didn't know, their voices echoing from a bottomless pit. The Blackthorn Hollow Library was a cramped space with flickering lights and dusty shelves. Librarian Harold Vance, a stooped man with thick glasses, was reluctant until Emily framed her research as a travel piece. He pointed her to bound newspapers and ledgers in a musty corner. The records were a goldmine. St. Agnes, built in 1843, was the town's heart until 1892 fire gutted it. The official cause was lightning, but a ledger's margin note read, "Fire not natural. Father Elias warned us." Emily's pen paused. Father Elias appeared again in a 1901 clipping about a priest who vanished after an unsanctioned ritual. Locals believed he'd angered something. God, the devil, or worse. More emerged in 1920. Abigail Morse claimed the church was cursed after her son vanished during a service. She was institutionalized. In 1954, teenagers saw a lady in white in the church. One, Tommy Reed, drowned himself a year later, mute. The pattern repeated. Disappearances, breakdowns, all tied to the crypt. Emily photocopied everything, her mind racing. A pamphlet, The Order of St. Agnes, described a secretive group from the 1800s tasked with guarding the sacred threshold. Their language was cult-like, mentioning appeasing the shadow and sealing the gate. Members included Elias and Abigail. Emily's stomach twisted. What were they guarding? She asked Vance about a local expert. He hesitated, then named Father Daniel, the church's last priest, now a recluse by the old mill. Father Daniel's cottage was a squat, overgrown building near a derelict mill. Emily knocked, expecting rejection, but he opened the door, a man in his 70s with haunted eyes. "Clara called," he said. "You're the reporter." Inside, religious icons crowded the room, crosses, saints, a worn Bible. Emily asked about Elias, the fire, the order. Daniel's face darkened. "St. Agnes is a wound. Poke it, it bleeds." He leaned forward. The church was built on something older than Christianity, a native burial ground, maybe. The order tried to contain it. Elias thought he could banish it, but he woke it instead. "What's it?" Emily asked. "A shadow. It feeds on guilt, secrets. The fire broke its seal. People go in, don't come out right." He refused to discuss the crypt, only saying, "If you hear singing, run. If you see her, it's too late." He gave her a silver cross. "Keep this close." Emily left, the cross heavy in her pocket. Her notes swirled. Shadow, guilt, her. She needed to see the crypt, but not alone. Lily might help. Lily agreed to join Emily at St. Agnes, though her hands shook. "Grandma said it's where the devil prays," she said as they drove under a moonless sky. The church loomed, its doors ajar. Inside, the air was colder, the silence heavier. Their flashlights swept the nave, catching cobwebs and dust. The crypt stairs were slick, the air thick with a metallic tang. At the bottom, a chamber held stone shelves with crumbling boxes, relics or bones. A circular slab bore strange carvings, spirals, crosses, an eye. A hung rose, Latin, Peccata tua te sequuntur, your sins follow you. Lily's light flickered. Black mist seeped from the slab. A woman in white appeared, her face a void. "Confess," she whispered. Lily screamed, running. Emily followed, the voice echoing in her mind, her guilt, her sister, her lies, surging. At the inn, Lily locked herself away, sobbing. Emily studied her notes, the cross on her nightstand. The Latin phrase was from an old text about unconfessed sins. The slab's symbols resembled ancient wards. She called Daniel, but his phone was dead. At his cottage, she found him slumped, blood trickling from his nose. A note. The shadow knows. I'm sorry. Paramedics called it a heart attack. Emily didn't buy it. In the library, she found Abigail's journal. The lady in white sees your sins. The crypt is her prison, breaking. The order had trapped an entity that fed on guilt. Emily's own guilt, her sister, her ambition, felt exposed. She prepared to return. Flashlight, crowbar, cross. The shadow was awake, and it wanted her. Midnight at St. Agnes was a void. The crypt's slab was cracked, mist coiling. The chanting deafened, Peccatua. The woman in white lunged, her void face accusing. Emily's guilt flooded, every lie, every hurt. Clutching the cross, she screamed, "You're not real." She smashed the slab. A pit opened, pulsing with light. The woman shrieked, dissolving. Emily threw the cross in. Light erupted, silencing the chants. She staggered out, dawn breaking. The church was still, but not empty. Emily left, unwritten story in her mind. She drove to her sister, seeking redemption, knowing the shadow waited for the next guilty soul.